The afternoon light filtered through the dusty window of the small apartment, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Elena Martinez sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the old steamer trunk that had occupied the corner of her bedroom for the past 3 years. It was large, battered, covered in faded travel stickers from places she'd never been, and held together by leather straps that had cracked with age. To anyone else, it looked like junk, the kind of thing people hauled to the curb on garbage day without a second thought. But to Elena, it was the last piece of her father she had left. She was 32 years old, though the worry lines around her eyes made her look older. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her clothes, a faded sweater and jeans worn thin at the knees, spoke of someone who had learned to stretch every dollar until it screamed. She worked at 2 jobs, one as a checkout clerk at a discount grocery store, the other cleaning offices at night when the city grew quiet and her daughter was asleep. Neither job paid well. Both left her exhausted. The apartment was small, just 2 rooms in a building that had seen better decades. The wallpaper peeled at the corners. The radiator clanked and hissed, but never quite delivered enough heat. The kitchen sink dripped no matter how many times she tightened the faucet. But it was home, or at least it had been, until the eviction notice arrived 2 weeks ago. Elena picked up the letter from the nightstand and read it again, even though she had memorized every word. 30 days to vacate. Rent arrears totaling 4 months. Odd legal action pending if payment not received. The words blurred together. Not from tears. She had cried those already. But from the sheer weight of them pressing down on her chest like stones. She had tried everything. She'd asked her landlord for an extension, promising to catch up as soon as she could. He'd refused, his voice flat and indifferent over the phone. She'd applied for emergency assistance, but the waiting list stretched months into the future. She'd borrowed what she could from friends, small amounts they could barely afford to lend, and it still wasn't enough. The math was simple and brutal. She needed money she didn't have, and she needed it now. Her 7-year-old daughter, Sophia, was in the other room, coloring at the small table they used for meals. She hummed softly to herself, oblivious to the storm gathering around them. Elena had worked hard to shield her from the worst of it, smiling when Sophia asked why they ate cereal for dinner again, telling her it was a special treat when they turned off the lights early to save on electricity. Children deserved to feel safe, even when their mother's world was crumbling. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Elena rose slowly, her body aching from the overnight shift she'd finished only a few hours earlier. She opened the door to find her older sister, Carmen, standing in the hallway with her arms crossed and an expression that said she'd come to deliver a lecture, not comfort. Carmen was everything Elena wasn't. Polished, confident, financially stable. She worked in real estate, wore designer clothes even on casual days, yet and drove a car that cost more than Elena earned in 2 years. Their relationship had always been complicated, a mixture of sisterly love and quiet resentment that neither of them acknowledged openly. "You look terrible," Carmen said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Nice to see you too," Elena replied, closing the door. Carmen's eyes swept the small apartment, taking in the peeling paint, the second-hand furniture, the eviction notice still sitting on the nightstand. Her gaze landed on the trunk in the corner, and her expression hardened. "You're still keeping that thing," she said. It wasn't a question. It was Dad's. "It's junk, Elena. It's been junk since the day he bought it at some flea market 30 years ago." Elena felt her jaw tighten. "It's not junk." Carmen sighed, the sound heavy with exasperation. "You're about to be evicted, and you're holding onto a piece of garbage because it makes you feel sentimental. Do you realize how crazy that sounds? I'm not getting rid of it." "Why not? You could sell it. Someone might give you $50 for it. Maybe 100 if you find the right buyer. That's money you need right now. $50 won't save me, Carmen. No, but it's $50 more than you have sitting on your nightstand. Carmen moved closer, her heels clicking against the worn floor. You need to be practical. I know you loved Dad. I loved him too. But keeping a broken trunk isn't going to bring him back, and it's definitely not going to pay your rent. Elena turned away, her hands trembling slightly. She knew Carmen meant well, in her own blunt way. Her sister had offered to lend her money before, small amounts with conditions attached, advice about budgeting, suggestions about better jobs, comments about choices Elena had made that Carmen wouldn't have. But Elena had stopped asking. Charity with strings felt heavier than poverty without them. I'm handling it, Elena said quietly. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you're about to be homeless with a child to take care of, and you're refusing to sell the one thing that might actually help. It's not about the money. Then what is it about? Elena looked at the trunk again, remembering the day her father had brought it home. She'd been 9 years old, and he'd carried it into the house with a grin so wide it made her laugh. He'd told her it was a treasure chest, that one day it would hold all the important things in their family. Over the years, it had held photo albums, now old letters, her mother's wedding dress after she passed, her father's tools, his favorite books. When he died 3 years ago, Elena had inherited it, along with his debts, and a small life insurance policy that barely covered the funeral. She'd opened it once after the funeral, sorting through the contents. Most of it was ordinary, keepsakes with sentimental value, but no monetary worth. She'd kept it all, unable to throw away the pieces of her father's life. And then she'd closed the trunk and let it sit in the corner, a silent companion to her grief. It's the last thing I have of him, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Carmen softened slightly, but only slightly. I understand that. I do. But Dad wouldn't want you to lose your home because of a trunk. He'd want you to take care of Sophia, or he'd want you to survive. I am surviving. Barely. The word hung in the air between them, sharp and true. Elena wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she couldn't. Carmen was right. She was barely surviving. Every month was a battle. Every bill was a crisis. Every unexpected expense, a broken shoe, a school field trip fee, a cavity that needed filling, sent her scrambling to cover the gap. She was tired. So deeply tired that sometimes she wondered if she'd ever feel rested again. I have to go, Carmen said, glancing at her watch. I have a showing in 20 minutes. But think about what I said, okay? That trunk isn't worth your daughter's security. She left without waiting for a response, the door clicking shut behind her. Elena stood in the center of the room, listening to the sound of Carmen's heels fading down the hallway. When the silence returned, it felt even heavier than before. Sophia appeared in the doorway, holding a drawing of a house with a garden and 2 stick figures standing in front. Mommy, is Aunt Carmen mad at you? No, baby. She's just worried. About what? Elena forced a smile. Grown-up stuff. Nothing you need to worry about. Sophia held up her drawing. I made this for you. It's us in our new house. The one with the big yard you always talk about. Elena's throat tightened. She took the drawing, studying the careful crayon lines, the bright colors Sophia had chosen for the flowers. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Do you think we'll live there someday? Maybe, Elena said, though the word felt like a lie. That night, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Elena sat alone in the dim light of the kitchen, a cup of cold coffee in front of her. And the eviction notice lay beside it, a countdown she couldn't stop. She had 28 days left. 28 days to find money she didn't have. 28 days before she and Sophia would be on the street with nowhere to go. She thought about Carmen's words. Sell the trunk. Be practical. Let go of the past to secure the future. It made sense. It was logical. And yet, every time she considered it, something inside her resisted. Not just sentiment, though that was part of it, but something deeper. A feeling she couldn't name, as if letting go of the trunk meant letting go of more than just an object, as if it meant admitting defeat in some fundamental way. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her friend Maria, another single mother who worked the night shift at the office building. Heard about the eviction. I'm so sorry. If you need anything, let me know. Elena stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Thanks. I'll figure it out. But she didn't know how. The following days blurred together in a haze of worry and exhaustion. Elena picked up extra shifts whenever she could, but it barely made a dent in the debt. She sold what little she owned of value, a necklace her mother had given her, an old laptop that still worked, a set of dishes she'd received as a wedding gift years ago before her ex-husband had left. The money helped, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. People began to talk. At work, co-workers whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. At Sophia's school, other mothers exchanged glances when Elena arrived late to pick her up, still wearing her grocery store uniform. The judgment was quiet but unmistakable. She was failing. Everyone could see it. One afternoon, as Elena walked home from her shift at the grocery store, she ran into Mrs. Chen, her downstairs neighbor. Mrs. Chen was an elderly woman who had lived in the building for over 40 years. She had always been kind to Elena, often watching Sophia when Elena's schedule demanded it. I heard about the eviction, Mrs. Chen said gently. I'm very sorry, dear. Elena nodded, too tired to pretend everything was fine. Thank you. Have you considered selling some of your belongings? I know it's difficult, but sometimes letting go is necessary. I've sold what I can. Mrs. Chen hesitated, then said, What about that old trunk in your apartment? I've seen it when you leave your door open. It looks like it might be worth something to a collector. Elena felt a flash of frustration. Why was everyone so fixated on the trunk? It was my father's. I'm not selling it. I understand. But your father would want you and Sophia to be safe. Sometimes the things we keep for love end up costing us more than we realize. With all due respect, Mrs. Chen, you don't know what my father would want. The older woman's expression didn't change. Perhaps not. But I know what it's like to hold on to the past when the present demands attention. I've lost things I thought I couldn't live without. And I survived. You will too, but only if you make the hard choices. Elena walked away before the conversation could continue. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, each step feeling heavier than the last. Inside, Sophia was doing homework at the table, her tongue poking out in concentration as she worked through math problems. Elena stood in the doorway, watching her daughter, and felt the weight of every decision she'd ever made pressed down on her shoulders. That night, she stood in front of the trunk, staring at it in the dim light. She knelt down and ran her fingers over the cracked leather straps, the tarnished brass buckles, the faded stickers from cities her father had visited before she was born. Paris, Rome, Istanbul, places that felt impossibly distant from this small, cold apartment. She opened the trunk slowly, the hinges creaking with age. Inside were the things she'd packed away years ago. Photo albums with pictures of her father smiling, his arm around her mother, both of them young and full of hope. Letters he'd written to her mother during a long business trip, filled with mundane details about hotels and meetings, but signed always with I love you. A wooden box containing her mother's wedding ring, too small for Elena's fingers. A set of tools her father had used to fix things around the house, each one worn smooth from use. She lifted each item carefully, searching for something, anything, that might be worth selling. But it was all sentimental, all priceless to her, worthless to anyone else. The trunk itself was the only thing with potential value, and even that was questionable. It was old, damaged, heavy. Who would want it? Elena closed the lid and sat back against the wall, exhaustion washing over her. Maybe Carmen was right. Maybe holding onto the trunk was foolish. Maybe she needed to let go, not just of the trunk, but of the idea that keeping her father's memory alive required physical objects. Maybe love didn't need relics, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Not yet. The next morning, Elena received a call from her landlord. His voice was impatient, businesslike. "I need to know your plans, Mrs. Martinez. Are you going to pay the arrears, or should I proceed with the eviction?" "I'm working on it," Elena said, hating how weak her voice sounded. "Working on it isn't an answer. I need payment by the end of the month, or you're out. I have other tenants waiting for that unit." "I understand. Do you? Because this isn't a charity, Mrs. Martinez. This is a business. I've been patient, but my patience has limits." The call ended before she could respond. Elena stood in the kitchen, staring at the phone in her hand, feeling something inside her crack. She'd tried so hard. She'd worked herself to exhaustion. She'd sacrificed everything, and it still wasn't enough. Sophia appeared in the doorway, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Mommy, we're going to be late for school." Elena wiped her eyes quickly. "Right. Let's go." They walked to school together, Sophia chattering about a project she was excited about, something involving papier-mâché and glitter. Elena listened, nodding in the right places, but her mind was elsewhere. She was calculating numbers again, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. By the time they reached the school gates, she'd run through every scenario she could think of. None of them worked. "Bye, Mommy," Sophia called, running toward the entrance. "Bye, baby. Have a good day." Elena watched until Sophia disappeared inside, then turned and walked slowly back toward home. The streets were busy with morning traffic, people rushing to work, to appointments, to lives that seemed impossibly ordered compared to hers. She felt invisible among them, just another struggling single mother in a city full of them. When she reached her building, she found Carmen waiting outside, leaning against her car. She straightened when she saw Elena approaching. "We need to talk," Carmen said. "Now's not a good time." "It's never a good time with you. But we're talking anyway." Carmen followed Elena inside and up the stairs. "I spoke to a few people I know, antique dealers, collectors. I described the trunk to them." Elena unlocked her apartment door. "I told you I'm not selling it. Just listen. Most of them said it's probably worth $50 to $100 like I thought. But one guy, he deals in vintage travel items, said if it's in decent shape, he might go as high as $200. $200 won't solve my problems. No, but it's something. And right now, you need something." Elena dropped her bag on the table and turned to face her sister. "Why are you pushing this so hard?" "Because I'm watching you drown, and you're refusing to grab the life preserver. I don't understand it, Elena. It's a trunk. Just a trunk. Dad's been gone for 3 years. Keeping it won't bring him back. You think I don't know that? Then why won't you let it go?" Elena felt anger surge through her, hot and sudden. "Because it's mine. Because it's the only thing I have that proves he existed, that he loved me, that our family meant something before everything fell apart. Because selling it feels like admitting that nothing matters except money. And I'm not ready to believe that yet." Carmen stared at her, surprised by the outburst. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Carmen's expression softened slightly. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to help." "I know." "Then let me, please, call the guy I found. At least find out what he'd offer. You don't have to decide right now. Just see what it's worth." Elena wanted to refuse. She wanted to tell Carmen to leave, to stop pushing, to accept that some things weren't for sale. But she was tired. So tired. and the eviction notice was still sitting on her nightstand, counting down the days until she and Sophia had nowhere to go. "Fine," Elena said finally. "I'll call him, but I'm not promising anything." Carmen nodded, relief crossing her face. She pulled out her phone and sent Elena the contact information. "His name is Marcus Webb. He's expecting your call." After Carmen left, Elena sat at the table, staring at the phone number on her screen. She didn't want to make the call. Every part of her resisted it. But she thought about Sophia's drawing of the house with the garden. She thought about the eviction notice. She thought about the weeks ahead, the uncertainty, the fear. She dialed the number. Marcus Webb answered on the second ring. His voice was pleasant, professional. "Hello?" "Hi, my name is Elena Martinez. My sister Carmen gave me your number. She said you might be interested in an old trunk." Yes. She mentioned you might call. Tell me about it." Elena described the trunk as best she could. The size, the condition, the travel stickers, the brass fittings. Marcus listened without interrupting, the occasionally making sounds of interest. "It sounds like it could be from the early to mid-20th century," he said when she finished. "Those were popular with ocean liner travelers. The stickers add value if they're authentic. Would you be willing to send me some photos?" I guess so." "Great. If it's what I think it is, I could offer you $250. Possibly more if it's in better condition than you described." $250. It was more than Carmen had estimated, but it was still a fraction of what Elena needed. It wouldn't pay the rent arrears. It wouldn't stop the eviction. It would buy her maybe a week of breathing room, nothing more. "Can I think about it?" Elena asked. "Of course. Take your time. But if you do decide to sell, let me know soon. I have a client who's been looking for something like this." After the call ended, Elena sat in silence. $250 for her father's trunk, for the last piece of him she had left. It felt obscene, putting a price on memory. And yet, what choice did she have? She stood and walked to the bedroom, staring at the trunk in the corner. In her mind, she could see her father's hands on it, his fingers tracing the same brass fittings she'd touched 1,000 times. She could hear his voice, low and warm, telling her stories about the places the stickers represented. She could feel the weight of his absence, a hole in her life that nothing had ever filled. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I don't know what else to do." The trunk sat silent, offering no answers. That evening, after putting Sophia to bed, Elena opened the trunk one more time. She wanted to take photos for Marcus Webb, but first she needed to go through everything inside, to say goodbye to each piece before she let it go. She removed the photo albums first, stacking them carefully beside her. Then the letters, the wooden box with her mother's ring, the tools, the books. At the bottom of the trunk lay a folded blanket, soft wool that smelled faintly of cedar. Elena lifted it out and set it aside. Beneath it was the flat wooden base of the trunk, unremarkable and worn. She ran her hand across it, feeling the grain of the wood, the slight imperfections. And then she felt something odd, a small gap, a seam she hadn't noticed before. Elena frowned and leaned closer. The gap ran along one side of the trunk's base, barely visible in the dim light. She pressed her fingers against it and felt the wood shift slightly, as if it wasn't quite secured. Curious, she tried to lift the edge. The base moved. Her heart quickened. She worked her fingers under the edge more firmly and pulled. The entire bottom panel of the trunk lifted free, revealing a hidden space beneath. A false floor. Elena stared, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The space beneath the false floor was about 6 inches deep, lined with old newspaper. And lying on top of the newspaper, gleaming faintly in the lamplight, were rows of gold bars. Her breath caught. She reached down with trembling hands and lifted one of the bars. It was heavy, solid, stamped with markings she didn't recognize. She counted quickly. 12 bars in the first row. She pulled back more of the newspaper and found another row beneath, and another, and another. Elena's hands shook as she continued counting. 30 bars, 40, 50. She stopped, unable to continue. Her mind was reeling. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. But the weight in her hands was undeniable. The gold was real. Her father's trunk, the one everyone had called worthless, the one she'd been pressured to sell for $250, had been hiding a fortune all along. Elena sat back against the wall, the gold bar still clutched in her hands, and felt something break open inside her. Not grief, not relief, but something bigger. A feeling she couldn't name yet. One that felt like vindication and terror and hope all tangled together. She thought about Carmen's voice. "It's junk, Elena." She thought about Mrs., and sometimes letting go is necessary. She thought about Marcus Webb. "I could offer you $250. And she thought about her father, the quiet man who had worked 2 jobs to support his family, who had always seemed to know more than he let on, who had smiled when he brought the trunk home and called it a treasure chest. He'd been right. Elena carefully lowered the false floor back into place, replaced the blanket, and closed the trunk. Her hands were still shaking. Her heart was racing. She didn't know what to do next. She didn't know what any of this meant. But one thing was certain. She wasn't selling the trunk, not now, not ever. Elena didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through the same loop of thoughts over and over again. The gold was real. She had touched it, or held it, counted at least 50 bars before her hands had started shaking too badly to continue. 50 bars of solid gold, hidden beneath a false floor, that no one, not her, not Carmen, not anyone who had ever looked at that trunk, had known existed. Her father had known. He must have. You didn't build a secret compartment by accident. You didn't hide that much gold without intent. But why hadn't he told her? Why hadn't he left a note, some explanation, some guidance for what she was supposed to do if she found it? The question spiraled endlessly. Where had the gold come from? How long had it been there? Was it legal? Was it stolen? Was she now in possession of something that could destroy her life instead of save it? Every time a car passed outside, Elena tensed, half expecting to hear sirens, to see police lights flashing through her window. It was irrational, she knew. No one knew what she'd found. No one had any reason to suspect. But guilt and fear had a way of making every shadow look threatening. When dawn finally broke, pale and gray through the thin curtains, Elena rose from bed feeling more exhausted than when she'd lain down. Sophia was still sleeping, curled under her blankets, with her favorite stuffed bear tucked under her chin. Elena stood in the doorway, watching her daughter's peaceful face, and felt a surge of protective terror so intense it made her chest ache. Everything had changed. Everything. But no one could know. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She made coffee with shaking hands, the familiar ritual helping to ground her slightly. As the coffee brewed, she returned to the bedroom and knelt beside the trunk. In the morning light, it looked exactly as it always had. Old, worn, ordinary. The secret it held was invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for it. Elena opened the lid slowly, almost expecting the gold to have vanished, to discover that the entire night had been some desperate hallucination born from exhaustion and stress. But when she lifted the blanket and removed the false floor, the gold was still there, gleaming softly in the pale light. She counted more carefully this time, her fingers moving methodically across each bar. 64 bars in total, each one roughly the size of a paperback book, stamped with markings she now studied more closely. The largest stamp showed an eagle with spread wings and text she couldn't quite read. Another marking showed numbers, 999.9, and a third marking, smaller, showed what looked like a weight measurement. Elena carefully lifted one bar and turned it over in her hands. It was surprisingly heavy, dense in a way that made her understand why the word dead weight existed. She estimated it weighed at least 25 pounds, maybe more. She had no idea what gold was worth per ounce, but she knew that multiplied by 64 bars, it had to be substantial. Substantial enough to pay her rent, substantial enough to change everything, but also substantial enough to raise questions she wasn't ready to answer. She replaced the bar carefully, positioned the false floor back into place, and closed the trunk. Then she sat back against the wall, hugging her knees to her chest, and tried to think practically. What did she actually know? She knew she had gold. She knew it had been hidden. She knew her father had never mentioned it. What she didn't know was infinitely more troubling. She didn't know if it was legal. She didn't know how to verify its authenticity or value. She didn't know how to sell it without attracting attention. She didn't know if there were people out there who might come looking for it. And she didn't know if keeping quiet about the discovery made her complicit in something illegal. The sound of Sophia stirring in the other room pulled Elena from her spiraling thoughts. She rose quickly, smoothing her clothes and wiping her face. Whatever came next, she needed to protect her daughter's normalcy. Sophia couldn't know. Not yet. The burden was too heavy for a 7-year-old to carry. "Morning, baby," Elena said, keeping her voice light as Sophia padded into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, Mommy. Oh, can we have pancakes?" "How about cereal today? We'll do pancakes this weekend, okay?" Sophia nodded, still half asleep, and climbed into her chair. Elena poured cereal and milk, her movements automatic while her mind continued to race. She needed information. She needed to understand what she'd found. But she couldn't ask openly, couldn't walk into a gold dealer's shop with questions that would immediately raise suspicion. The internet. She could start there. After dropping Sophia at school, Elena went to the public library instead of heading to work. She'd called in sick for her grocery store shift, something she never did. But she couldn't imagine standing at a register making small talk with customers while her mind was consumed by what lay hidden in her apartment. The library was quiet and populated by a handful of elderly patrons reading newspapers and a few students using the computers. Elena chose a terminal in the corner, logged in with her library card, and began searching. She started broad. Gold bars. The results were overwhelming. Thousands of pages about gold prices, investment gold, collector's coins, refinery processes. She narrowed her search. Gold bar markings. Better. She found websites explaining the stamps and numbers on gold bars, how different refineries marked their products, how purity was indicated. The number 999.9 meant the gold was exceptionally pure, almost completely refined. The weight markings varied, but bars of that size were typically 1 kilogram, which translated to roughly 32 ounces. Elena's pulse quickened. She opened a new tab and searched for the current price of gold. The number that appeared made her stop breathing. Gold was trading at approximately $2,000 per ounce. She did the math 3 times, certain she'd made an error. 64 bars, 32 ounces per bar, $2,000 per ounce, $4,096,000. Elena stared at the number on the screen, her mind refusing to accept it. That couldn't be right. She'd miscalculated. She had to have miscalculated. She did the math again, more slowly. 64 times 32 equals 2,048 ounces. 2,048 times 2,000 equals 4,000,000. $96,000. The same answer. Over $4 million hidden in her father's trunk. Elena's hands gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles white. $4 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, meaningless. She couldn't visualize that much money. She couldn't comprehend what it meant in practical terms beyond the obvious. It meant she could pay her rent. It meant she could keep her apartment. It meant she and Sophia could be safe. But it also meant danger. It meant questions. It meant the possibility that everything she had could be taken away faster than it had been given. She forced herself to keep researching, to push past the shock and gather more information. She searched for laws about gold ownership, about inheritance, about reporting requirements. The information was dense, full of legal terminology she didn't fully understand, but a few key points emerged. Gold itself was legal to own. There was no law against keeping gold bars. But there were laws about how you acquired them, about proving ownership, and about paying taxes on any sale. If the gold had been purchased legally, if her father had kept records, if everything had been done properly, then she had nothing to worry about. But if the gold had been obtained illegally, if it was stolen property, if it was connected to criminal activity, then possessing it made her an accomplice, even if she'd had no knowledge of its existence until last night. Elena closed her eyes, fighting down a wave of nausea. She thought about her father, the quiet man who had worked as a freight supervisor at the shipyard for 30 years. He'd been honest, dependable, the kind of man who always paid his bills on time and never took shortcuts. She couldn't imagine him stealing anything. But $4 million didn't just appear. It came from somewhere. And the fact that he'd hidden it suggested he hadn't wanted anyone to know about it. She opened her eyes and continued searching, looking for any news stories about missing gold, about theft, about unsolved cases that might connect to what she'd found. Hours passed as she scrolled through articles, each one increasing her anxiety. There were stories about gold smuggling, about theft from refineries, about illegal mining operations, but nothing that seemed to match her situation, nothing that provided the clarity she desperately needed. By mid-afternoon, her head was pounding, and her eyes burned from staring at the screen. She'd learned enough to know she was sitting on a fortune, and enough to know that fortune came with enormous risk. What she hadn't learned was what to do about it. Elena logged out of the computer and left the library, on walking slowly through the streets toward Sophia's school. The city looked different somehow, sharper, more vivid. Or maybe it was just that everything looked different when you were carrying a secret that could change your entire life. She picked up Sophia, listened to her chatter about art class and a new friend she'd made, and walked home with her daughter's small hand tucked into hers. The normalcy of it felt surreal. This morning she'd been hours away from homelessness. Now she was potentially a millionaire. And yet, nothing had actually changed. She was still walking the same streets, still wearing the same worn shoes, still worried about money. Because the gold, as valuable as it was, meant nothing if she couldn't figure out how to turn it into security without destroying her life in the process. That evening, after Sophia went to bed, Elena's phone rang. It was Carmen. "Did you call Marcus Webb?" Carmen asked without preamble. Elena's stomach tightened. "I did." "And?" "He offered $250. "That's good. Better than I thought. Are you going to take it?" Elena looked toward the bedroom, where the trunk sat in its usual corner, hiding a secret worth 16,000 times what Marcus Webb had offered. "I'm still thinking about it." "Elena, what is there to think about? You need money. He's offering money. It's that simple." "Nothing is ever that simple." Carmen sighed, the sound heavy with frustration. "You're being stubborn again? You know that, right? You're so focused on holding on to the past that you can't see the present falling apart around you." I said I'm thinking about it. Fine, think about it. But don't take too long. The eviction isn't going to wait for you to feel ready. After the call ended, Elena sat in the dark kitchen, her cold coffee forgotten beside her. Carmen had no idea how right she was. Elena was holding on to something from the past. But it wasn't sentiment. It was literal gold, and she had no idea what to do with it. She needed help. She needed someone who could give her honest advice without judgment. Someone who could help her navigate the impossible situation she'd found herself in. But who? Carmen would immediately try to take control, make decisions for Elena that Elena didn't want made. Her friends were struggling as much as she was, none of them equipped to advise on something this consequential. And going to the authorities felt like inviting disaster. Elena thought about Mrs. Chen, on the neighbor who had always been kind, who had offered wisdom without pushing. But this was too big to share with a casual acquaintance, too dangerous to trust to someone she didn't know deeply. She was alone with this, completely alone. The next morning, Elena returned to work at the grocery store, moving through her shift in a daze. She scanned items, made change, smiled automatically at customers, all while her mind circled endlessly around the same questions. By her lunch break, she'd made a decision. She needed to verify what she had. She needed to know, beyond any doubt, that the gold was real, that her estimates about its value were accurate. Only then could she make an informed choice about what to do next. She spent her break searching on her phone for gold appraisers, precious metal dealers, or anyone who could authenticate gold bars without asking too many questions. Most of the results were for coin shops or jewelry buyers, places that seemed too small, too public. She needed someone professional, someone used to handling valuable items discreetly. She found a business called Metro Precious Metals, located in a quieter part of the city. Their website advertised appraisal services, secure transactions, confidentiality guaranteed. Elena stared at the address, weighing the risk. Taking even one bar out of her apartment meant exposing what she had. But she needed to know. That evening, after Sophia was asleep, Elena opened the trunk and carefully removed one gold bar from the center of the stack, where its absence would be least noticeable. She wrapped it in an old towel, placed it in a canvas shopping bag, and hid the bag in the back of her closet. Tomorrow she would take it to be appraised. Tomorrow she would start finding answers. Sleep came slightly easier that night, though her dreams were filled with confusing images of her father's face, gold bars falling like rain, and endless corridors where she searched for doors that didn't exist. The next day was Saturday. Elena told Sophia they were going on an adventure, and together they took the bus across the city to Metro Precious Metals. The shop was in a commercial building that looked worn, but respectable, its windows covered with security bars and frosted glass that prevented anyone from seeing inside. Elena hesitated outside the door, the canvas bag heavy in her hands. This was the moment. Once she walked through that door, there was no taking it back, and someone else would know what she had. The secret would no longer be hers alone. "Mommy, are we going in?" Sophia asked, tugging on her hand. Elena took a breath and pushed open the door. Inside, the shop was smaller than she expected, clinical and quiet. Glass display cases lined one wall, showing coins and bars of various sizes. Behind a thick security partition sat a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. "Good morning," he said, looking up. "How can I help you?" Elena approached the counter, acutely aware of Sophia standing beside her, of the weight of the bag in her hands, of the impossibility of turning back now. "I need an appraisal for a gold bar." The man's expression didn't change, but she saw interest sharpen in his eyes. "Of course. May I see it?" Elena glanced at Sophia. "Sweetie, why don't you sit over there and color?" She handed Sophia her backpack, which contained coloring books and crayons she'd brought for this purpose. Sophia nodded and settled into a chair near the window, immediately absorbed in her drawings. Elena turned back to the counter and carefully unwrapped the towel, revealing the gold bar. She placed it on the small tray that slid through an opening in the security partition. The man picked up the bar with practiced ease, examining it under a bright lamp. He turned it over, studying the markings, then placed it on a small digital scale. His expression remained neutral, professional, but Elena saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "Where did you acquire this?" he asked. Elena had prepared for this question. "It was my father's. He passed away a few years ago. I found it among his belongings." "I see." The man continued his examination, using a jeweler's loupe to study the stampings more closely. "Do you know anything about its origin, where your father might have purchased it?" "No. He never mentioned it." The man nodded slowly, then looked up at her. "This is a 1-kilogram gold bar, approximately 32 troy ounces. The purity marking of 999.9 indicates it's virtually pure gold, which is consistent with investment-grade bullion. The stamps suggest it was refined by a reputable facility, though I'd need to verify the exact refinery to be certain. And the value? Based on today's market price, approximately $64,000. The number hit Elena like a physical blow. $64,000. For one bar. She had 64 of them. Her mental math, undone a dozen times since the discovery, suddenly felt horrifyingly real. $4 million had been theoretical. Now it was concrete, verified by an expert who dealt with this kind of thing every day. She forced her voice to remain steady. "Is it legal to own something like this?" "Absolutely. Gold ownership is legal. The only questions would be about how it was acquired and whether appropriate taxes were paid if it was sold. But simply possessing it is not illegal." "And if I wanted to sell it?" The man set the bar down carefully. "I could make you an offer. However, I'd need documentation. Proof of ownership, explanation of origin, that sort of thing. Without documentation, the transaction becomes more complicated." "What kind of complications?" "Questions about provenance, reporting requirements. So the IRS takes a keen interest in large gold transactions. And if there's any possibility the gold was obtained illegally, well, that's a problem neither of us wants to be involved with." Elena felt cold despite the warmth of the shop. "I don't have documentation, just the bar itself." The man studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "May I give you some advice?" "Please." "If you have more of these, and I suspect you do based on your questions, you need to proceed very carefully. Gold in this quantity and form typically comes from one of 3 sources. Legal purchase from a refinery or dealer, in which case there should be receipts or records. Inheritance from someone who purchased it legally, in which case you need to establish the chain of ownership. Or illegal acquisition, which I strongly suggest is not the case here." "It's not," Elena said firmly. "My father was an honest man." "Then your best course of action is to find out how he acquired it. Look for receipts, bank statements, any documentation that proves legitimate purchase. Without that, selling will be extremely difficult, and attempting to do so might raise red flags you don't want raised." Elena nodded, her mind racing. Documentation. She'd been through everything in the trunk, every paper, every envelope. She hadn't seen anything that looked like a receipt for gold, but maybe she'd missed something. Maybe there was more hidden, more secrets the trunk was waiting to reveal. "Thank you," she said, reaching for the bar. "That's very helpful." The man slid the tray back through the partition, but before Elena could take the bar, he spoke again. "Wait, one more thing. If your father went to the trouble of hiding this, there was a reason. Whatever that reason was, it's yours to figure out now. But be careful. When this much money is involved, people can become unpredictable. Elena wrapped the bar back in the towel, her hand steadier than she expected. I'll be careful. She collected Sophia, who had filled 3 coloring pages with elaborate scenes of flowers and rainbows, and they left the shop. On the bus ride home, Elena stared out the window, processing everything she'd learned. The gold was real, the value was real, and the danger was real. But so was the opportunity. Back at the apartment, after Sophia was in bed, Elena opened the trunk once more. This time, she didn't just lift the false floor. She examined every inch of the trunk's interior, running her hands along the walls, from the lid, the corners, searching for more hidden spaces, more secrets. She found nothing, just the false floor and the gold beneath it. Frustrated, she began going through the trunk's contents more systematically, opening every photo album, reading every letter, examining every object. She'd been through these things before, but always quickly, always emotionally. Now she searched with purpose, looking for clues, for explanations, for anything that might tell her where the gold had come from. Hours passed. She found nothing that helped. Her father's life, as documented in the trunk's contents, was ordinary. Work schedules, birthday cards, repair receipts for the house, love letters to her mother. The life of a working-class man who had never shown any signs of secret wealth. And Elena was about to give up when she noticed something odd about one of the old photo albums. The binding was loose, the spine damaged. She opened it carefully, and several loose photos fell out. She gathered them up, glancing at each one. Her parents on vacation, her father at work. Her as a child, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. And then a photo that didn't fit. It showed her father, much younger, standing with a group of men in front of what looked like a warehouse. They were all wearing work clothes, and her father's arm was around the shoulders of a man she didn't recognize. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, was written, "Shipyard Crew, 1987. Last delivery before closure." Elena stared at the photo, her mind working. 1987. That was more than 35 years ago before she was born, before her parents had bought their house, before, according to every story she'd heard, her father had established himself in his career. Last delivery before closure. What had closed? The shipyard had operated throughout her father's entire career. It hadn't closed until years after his retirement, unless this was a different shipyard, or a different facility entirely. Elena turned the photo over again, studying the image more carefully. The warehouse in the background was large, industrial. The men looked tired, but satisfied, as if they'd just completed something significant. And in the corner of the photo, barely visible, was a sign. She couldn't read all of it, but she could make out 3 letters. F-E-D. Federal? Federation. The quality of the photo was too poor to be certain, but it was something. The first real clue she'd found that suggested her father's life might have contained more than the surface story she'd always known. Elena placed the photo carefully aside and continued searching. Near the bottom of the album, she found another loose item tucked into the pages, an old business card, yellowed with age. It read, "Harold Grant, Acquisition Specialist, Maritime Securities Division." Below that, a phone number and an address in a city 2 hours away. Elena's heart beat faster. Maritime Securities Division. Her father had worked in shipping, in freight management. Could this be connected? She pulled out her phone and searched for the phone number. It was no longer in service, the recording informing her the number had been disconnected. She tried the company name. Nothing came up. The address, when she searched for it, showed an office building that now housed a law firm. Whatever Maritime Securities Division had been, it no longer existed. But Harold Grant might. Elena searched for the name, adding the city from the address. Several results appeared, but most were too young or too old. Finally, she found an obituary from 5 years ago. Harold Grant, 78, passed away after a long illness. Survived by his wife Patricia and 3 children. A dead end. Or was it? The obituary mentioned Patricia Grant, the wife who had survived him. She might still be alive. She might remember her husband's work. She might have answers. Elena searched for Patricia Grant in the same city. Multiple results appeared, but one included an age that matched, 76, listed in a white pages directory with a phone number. Elena stared at the number on her screen. It was late, too late to call now. And even if she did, what would she say? "Hello, I'm a stranger with questions about your dead husband's work from 35 years ago, because I found gold hidden in my father's trunk, and I think it might be connected." It sounded insane. It was insane. But it was also the only lead she had. Elena saved the number to her contacts and closed her phone. Tomorrow, she would decide whether to make the call. Tonight, she needed to sleep, though she suspected sleep would be as elusive as it had been every night since the discovery. She replaced everything in the trunk, lowered the false floor over the gold, and closed the lid. As she did, she noticed something she'd missed before. A small scratch on the inside of the trunk's lid, faint but deliberate. Letters carved into the wood. PFC. Patricia's initials? No. Oh, that didn't make sense. Her mother's name had been Maria. Elena's own initials were EMR. PFC. What did it mean? Elena traced the letters with her finger, feeling the slight indentation where someone, presumably her father, had carved them. It was another clue, another piece of a puzzle she didn't yet understand. She turned off the light and stood in the darkness of her bedroom, the trunk's shape barely visible in the shadows. Outside, the city hummed with its usual nighttime sounds. Traffic, distant sirens, the hiss of the radiator struggling to provide heat. Everything looked the same. Everything felt different. Elena climbed into bed, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. Tomorrow she would call Patricia Grant. Tomorrow she would try to find answers. Tomorrow she would take another step toward understanding the impossible situation her father had left her. But tonight, she lay awake in the dark, thinking about her father's face, about the weight of gold bars, about the thin line between salvation and disaster. And she wondered if her father had known what he was leaving behind. If he'd understood that his final gift would be both treasure and burden, both hope and terror. If he'd known that his daughter would spend her nights lying awake, trying to decide whether the fortune hidden in his trunk was the answer to her prayers or the beginning of something far more complicated than poverty had ever been. The trunk sat silent in the corner. The gold beneath its false floor gleamed unseen in the darkness. And Elena, caught between everything she'd lost and everything she might gain, tried to imagine what her father would tell her to do if he were here now, if he could speak one more time, if he could explain the inexplicable gift he'd hidden away so many years ago. But her father was gone, and Elena was alone with the secret, the fear, and the impossible choice of what came next. Elena waited until Monday morning to make the call. She'd spent the entire weekend rehearsing what she would say, trying to find words that didn't sound desperate or insane. But every version felt wrong, too direct or too vague, too honest or too evasive. In the end, she decided the only approach was honesty, at least partial honesty. She dropped Sophia at school, then walked to a quiet park bench 3 blocks away. The morning was cold, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain. She pulled out her phone and stared at Patricia Grant's number for a long moment, then pressed call before she could lose her nerve. The phone rang 4 times. Elena was preparing to leave a voicemail when a woman's voice answered, cautious, and slightly breathless. "Hello? Mrs. Grant? Patricia Grant?" "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Elena Martinez. I'm calling about your late husband, Harold. I know this is unexpected, and I apologize for disturbing you, but I found your husband's business card among my father's belongings, and I was hoping you might be able to answer some questions." There was a pause. Elena could hear the sound of movement, perhaps the woman settling into a chair. "What was your father's name?" "Thomas Martinez. He worked in freight shipping at the harbor. He passed away 3 years ago." Another pause, longer this time. Thomas Martinez," Patricia repeated, her voice changing slightly, as if she were testing the name, trying to remember. "The name sounds familiar. When did your father know Harold?" "I'm not entirely sure. I found a photo dated 1987, and Harold's business card was with it. They worked together on something related to maritime securities." 1987, Patricia said softly. "That was the last year Harold worked for the government, before everything changed." Elena's pulse quickened. "The government?" "Yes. Harold worked for a federal agency handling maritime asset protection. I don't remember all the details. He never discussed his work much, but I know 1987 was significant. There was a project he worked on, something classified. It ended abruptly, and shortly after, Harold left government service entirely. He said it was time to move on, that the work had become too complicated." "Do you remember anything about the project? What it involved?" Patricia was quiet for a moment, and Elena heard the sound of papers rustling. "I kept some of Harold's old files, things he said I should hold on to, though he never told me why. Give me a moment." Elena waited, her heart pounding. She listened to distant sounds through the phone, footsteps, a drawer opening, more papers. "Here," Patricia said finally. "I have a folder marked Shipyard Closure 1987. Inside are documents, most of them heavily redacted. But there's a memo Harold wrote. Looks like a personal copy he kept. It mentions something called Operation Safeguard." "What was Operation Safeguard?" Patricia began reading, her voice steady. "In response to escalating geopolitical tensions and concerns about national reserve security, a classified initiative was undertaken to distribute portions of federal gold reserves to secure civilian locations. Selected personnel with security clearance and demonstrated loyalty were entrusted with safeguarding designated assets until such time as they could be safely returned to federal custody or released from obligation." Elena felt the world tilt slightly. Federal gold reserves. Her father had been entrusted with federal gold. "Does it say anything else?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a list of names, about 20 people." "Let me see." Patricia paused. "Yes, here it is. Thomas Martinez, freight supervisor, security clearance level 3, assigned allocation, Unit 17. "What does that mean? Now Unit 17? "I don't know. But there's a note at the bottom of the memo. It says, 'All participants sworn to confidentiality under federal security statute. Assets remain property of U.S. government until formal release authorization issued. Release authorization pending final security assessment. Estimated completion, 1990. 3 years after the gold had been distributed. But Elena's father had kept it until his death in 2021. More than 30 years beyond when he was supposed to return it." "Mrs. Grant, was the gold ever returned? Was the authorization ever issued?" Patricia sighed. "I don't think so. Harold stopped talking about it entirely after he left the agency. But I remember him saying once, years later, that the whole operation had been poorly managed, that people had been given responsibility without proper oversight, and when the political climate changed, the project was quietly buried. No one wanted to admit it had happened. So, the people who had the gold just kept it? I suppose so. Harold said most of them probably didn't even know what to do with it. They couldn't sell it without documentation. They couldn't return it because there was no one to return it to. The program had been erased from official records, and the people involved were sworn to secrecy. They were stuck. Elena thought about her father, carrying that secret for more than 3 decades, working his modest job, living his quiet life, all while sitting on a fortune he couldn't touch, couldn't use, couldn't even acknowledge existed. Mrs. Grant, is there any way to verify this? To prove the gold came from this program? I have the memo. I can send you a copy if you give me your email, but I don't know if that's enough for legal purposes. The program was classified, and it's been so long. I imagine most of the officials involved are dead or retired. Elena gave Patricia her email address, thanked her profusely, and ended the call. She sat on the bench, staring at nothing, trying to process what she'd learned. Her father hadn't stolen the gold. He hadn't acquired it illegally. He'd been trusted with it by the federal government, and then abandoned when the program fell apart. The gold was real, the responsibility was real, and now it was hers. Her phone buzzed. Patricia had sent the email with scanned copies of the memo and several other documents. Elena opened them, reading through the redacted pages with growing understanding. An Operation Safeguard had been a Cold War-era contingency plan, a way to protect national assets in case of catastrophic attack or political collapse. 23 participants had been selected, each given a portion of the reserve to hide in secure locations. And then the Cold War had ended. The threat had diminished, and the program had been quietly discontinued, but not properly concluded. The participants had been left in limbo, unable to return what they'd been given, unable to claim it as their own. Elena found a reference to Unit 17 in one of the documents. It specified the allocation: 64 bars of 400-ounce gold, approximately 800,000 ounces total, designated for secure civilian storage. 400-ounce bars. Elena's breath caught. She'd assumed the bars were 1 kilogram, to roughly 32 ounces. But if they were 400 ounces each, the math changed dramatically. She pulled out her phone's calculator with shaking hands. 64 bars, 400 ounces per bar, 25,600 total ounces. At $2,000 per ounce, that was $51,200,000. $51 million. But that was based on current market price for standard gold. These weren't standard bars. They were Federal Reserve gold, historical pieces with provenance. Collectors would pay a premium for such items, potentially double or triple the melt value. Elena's hands trembled as she recalculated. If the historical value pushed the price to $5,000 per ounce, conservatively, that meant $128 million. If the market for such rare pieces was strong, if the right buyers were found, the value could reach even higher. She thought about the appraiser's reaction when he'd seen her single bar, the surprise in his eyes. He must have recognized what it was, or at least suspected, and she'd only shown him one. She'd told him it was from her father's belongings, which was true, but she'd implied it was a single item, not part of a massive collection. Elena stood from the bench, her legs unsteady. She needed to go back to Metro Precious Metals. She needed to tell them the truth, or at least enough of the truth, to get proper authentication and valuation. She needed to understand exactly what she had. But first, she needed to verify the bar's weight. She'd been guessing based on their size and feel. If she was wrong about that, everything changed. Elena returned home, her mind racing through the implications. She opened the trunk, removed the false floor, and carefully lifted one of the gold bars. It was heavy, extraordinarily heavy. She took it to her bathroom and placed it on her cheap digital scale, the one she used to weigh packages. The scale maxed out at 10 kilograms. The bar exceeded the limit. The display read Error. Elena stared at the blinking letters. The bar was heavier than 22 pounds. Much heavier. Her estimate of 25 pounds had been low. If these were truly 400-ounce bars, they would weigh about 27.5 pounds each. She needed a better scale. She needed proper equipment. She needed help. Elena carefully rewrapped the bar and returned it to the trunk. Then she called Metro Precious Metals and asked to speak with the appraiser who had examined her bar, a man whose business card she'd kept, David Chen. "Mr. Chen, this is Elena Martinez. I came in on Saturday with a gold bar." "Yes, I remember. Have you found documentation?" "I found something. Historical documents suggesting the gold came from a federal program in the 1980s, Operation Safeguard. Have you heard of it?" There was a long pause. When Chen spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming more careful, more interested. "I've heard rumors. Nothing confirmed. Federal Reserve gold distributed for safekeeping during the Cold War. Most people think it's a myth. It's not a myth. I have documentation, and I have more than one bar." "How many more?" Elena hesitated. This was the moment. Once she said the number, there was no taking it back. 63 more. 64 total. Another pause, longer this time. "Mrs. Martinez, if what you're telling me is true, you're not sitting on $64,000. You're sitting on something exponentially more valuable. Federal Reserve gold of that era and provenance could sell for many times its melt value. Collectors, museums, private buyers, they would pay extraordinary premiums for authenticated pieces." "How much are we talking about?" "I'd need to examine the full collection and verify the documentation. But conservatively, if these are genuine 400-ounce Federal Reserve bars from Operation Safeguard, and if they can be properly authenticated, you could be looking at $4,000 to $5,000 per ounce, possibly more. That's over $100 million at minimum. So if the market is right, if the buyers are competitive, the value could reach $200 million or higher." Elena couldn't speak. The number was too large, too impossible. $200 million. It was more money than she could conceptualize, more than seemed real. "Mrs. Martinez, are you still there?" "Yes," she managed. "I'm here. I need you to understand something. If this is real, you need proper legal counsel, proper security, proper authentication. This isn't something you can handle alone. The IRS will be involved. Estate lawyers will be necessary. And you'll need protection. When word gets out about this, and it will get out, people will come. Some will want to help. Others will want to take advantage. You need to be extremely careful about who you trust." "I understand. I'd like to help you through this process. I have contacts, people who specialize in high-value authentication and sales. But first, I need to verify what you have. Can you bring one more bar to the shop and the documentation?" "When?" "As soon as possible. This isn't something that should wait." Elena agreed to come in the next morning. After hanging up, she sat in silence, trying to absorb the magnitude of what she'd just learned. $100 million. Possibly $200 million. Possibly more. The trunk everyone had called worthless was hiding a treasure that could change not just her life, but generations of her family's lives. Sophia's education, fully funded. A real house with a yard, security, freedom. Everything Elena had dreamed of and stopped believing possible. But along with the hope came a new kind of fear. Chen was right. Once people knew, everything would change. She'd become a target. Every friend, every relative, every acquaintance would look at her differently. Some would be happy for her. Others would be resentful, envious, suspicious. And some would try to take what was hers. That night, Elena barely slept. She lay awake, listening to Sophia's soft breathing in the next room, and thought about what came next. She thought about Carmen's voice insisting the trunk was junk. She thought about her landlord's dismissive tone. She thought about every person who had looked at her with pity, with judgment, with the assumption that she was failing because she deserved to fail. And she thought about her father, the quiet man who had carried an impossible secret to his grave, trusting that someday, somehow, his daughter would find what he'd left for her. The next morning, Elena took 2 gold bars to Metro Precious Metals, along with printed copies of the documents Patricia Grant had sent. David Chen was waiting for her, this time in a private room behind the main shop, more secure, more discreet. He examined the bars carefully, weighing them on precision scales, testing them with electronic instruments, studying the stampings under high magnification. The process took over an hour. Elena sat quietly, watching his face for reactions. Finally, Chen looked up. These are authentic Federal Reserve bars, 400 troy ounces each. The stampings match historical records of Treasury Department gold from the 1980s. The purity is 999.9, as marked. And the documentation you've provided corroborates your story about Operation Safeguard. So it's real. It's real. And it's worth more than I initially estimated. The market for historical federal gold is extremely strong right now. Based on recent auction results for similar pieces, I'd estimate each bar could sell for between $160,000 and $200,000, depending on the buyer. Elena did the math quickly. 64 bars at $180,000 average, $11.5 million. But Chen continued, however, that's the individual retail value. If you sold the entire collection as a single lot, to a museum or serious collector, the value increases significantly. A complete allocation from Operation Safeguard has never been sold at auction. This is unique. I've consulted with a colleague who specializes in historical precious metals, and he believes a complete authenticated set could bring between $200 and $260 million. $260 million. Elena's vision blurred slightly. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. $260 million, she repeated, needing to hear the words spoken aloud to believe them. Yes, it's an extraordinary situation. You need to decide how you want to proceed. Private sale versus auction. Single lot versus individual pieces. And you need legal guidance immediately. Estate tax implications alone will be complex. Elena nodded slowly, her mind struggling to process the information. Can you recommend someone? A lawyer who handles this kind of thing? I can. I'll give you several names. But Mrs. Martinez, I need to emphasize again, discretion is critical. Don't tell anyone else what you have until you have proper legal protection in place. I understand. Chen provided her with business cards for 3 law firms that specialized in high-value estate matters. Elena took them, thanked him, and left the shop in a daze. The gold bars remained with Chen temporarily, secured in his vault, while authentication reports were prepared. On the bus ride home, Elena stared out the window, watching the city pass by. Everything looked the same streets, the same buildings, the same people rushing to jobs and appointments. But she was different now. She was sitting on a fortune so vast it defied comprehension, hidden in a trunk in her tiny apartment, and no one around her had any idea. That afternoon, she called the first lawyer on the list, a woman named Rebecca Torres, who specialized in complex estate and tax matters. Torres listened as Elena explained the situation, asking sharp, focused questions. When Elena finished, Torres was quiet for a moment. "This is one of the most unusual cases I've encountered," Torres said finally. "But it's not insurmountable. We need to establish clear legal ownership, which the Operation Safeguard documentation should support. We need to address tax implications, which will be substantial, but manageable. And we need to ensure the sale process is handled properly. I'd like to take your case. My fee will be 5% of the final sale value. 5% of $260 million was $13 million. A staggering amount for legal services. But Elena didn't hesitate. Agreed. Good. Fine, I'll draft a retainer agreement and send it to you today. In the meantime, don't discuss this with anyone. Not family, not friends, not neighbors. Once we have legal protection established, we can begin the authentication and sale process. Elena agreed and ended the call. She sat in her quiet apartment, looking at the trunk, and felt the weight of the secret pressing down on her. She wanted to tell someone, to share the impossible news. But Chen and Torres had both been clear. Silence was essential until everything was properly secured. 3 days later, Rebecca Torres arrived at Elena's apartment with a team. Security personnel, insurance agents, and a specialized moving company. The trunk and its contents were carefully documented, photographed, and transferred to a secure vault facility. Elena signed papers, reviewed inventories, and watched as the last piece of her father disappeared into an armored truck. The apartment felt emptier without the trunk. The corner where it had sat for 3 years looked bare, wrong, but Elena knew it was safer this way. The authentication process would take weeks, followed by negotiations with potential buyers. Torres estimated the entire process would take 3 to 4 months before any sale was finalized. In the meantime, Elena's life continued in its familiar patterns, with one crucial difference: she could breathe. Torres had advanced her $50,000 against the future sale, enough to pay all her rent arrears, cover her bills, and buy Sophia new clothes and shoes. The eviction was withdrawn. The pressure lifted. Elena didn't tell Carmen yet. She didn't tell anyone. She went to work, picked up Sophia from school, uncooked dinner, and lived the same life she'd always lived. But inside, everything had changed. The fear that had consumed her for months was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty that the future would be different. 6 weeks after the trunk was secured, Rebecca Torres called with an update. We have a buyer, a private collector specializing in American historical artifacts. He's offering $258 million for the complete collection, authentication documents included. It's a strong offer. I recommend accepting. $258 million. Elena sat down, her legs suddenly weak. $258 million, she repeated. Yes. After taxes and fees, you'll net approximately $130 million. I know it's less than the gross amount, but it's still an extraordinary sum. $130 million. After a lifetime of struggling, after years of barely surviving, Elena would have $130 million. I accept, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. The sale closed 4 weeks later. Elena signed the final paperwork in Torres's office, surrounded by lawyers and financial advisors. When it was done, when the funds had been transferred to accounts set up in her name, Torres shook her hand. Congratulations, Mrs. Martinez. You're one of the wealthiest women in the state. Elena drove home slowly, still processing the reality. That evening, after Sophia was asleep, she finally called Carmen. Elena, is everything okay? Everything's fine. Better than fine. I need to tell you something. What is it? Remember Dad's trunk? The one you said was worthless? The one you wanted me to sell for $250? Yes. Did you finally sell it? I did. For $258 million. Silence. Complete silence. Carmen? That's not funny, Elena. It's not a joke. The trunk was hiding gold bars from a federal program in the 1980s. Dad was entrusted with them as part of a classified operation. I found documentation, got proper authentication, and sold the collection. After taxes and fees, I netted $130 million. More silence. Then, quietly, you're serious. I'm serious. Carmen's breathing was audible through the phone. $130 million. Yes. The trunk I told you to sell for $250. Yes. Oh my God, Elena. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. I was so wrong. I pushed you to get rid of it. And if you'd listened to me. But I didn't listen. I held on to it because it was Dad's, because it meant something to me. And it turned out Dad left me more than memories. He left me security. He left me a future. They talked for another hour, Carmen apologizing repeatedly, Elena reassuring her that everything was fine. When the call ended, Elena felt lighter. The secret was out, at least partially. Carmen would tell people. Word would spread. But Elena was ready now. She had legal protection, financial advisors, and a plan. Over the following weeks, she made changes slowly, deliberately. She bought a modest house with a yard, nothing ostentatious, just a comfortable place where Sophia could play safely. When she paid off every debt she'd ever accumulated. She set up trust funds for Sophia's education and future. She donated to the food bank where she'd once received help, to the school Sophia attended, to causes that mattered. And she created a foundation in her father's name, dedicated to helping struggling families, particularly single mothers facing eviction, with emergency financial assistance and long-term support. It was her way of honoring the man who had worked quietly his entire life, carrying a burden no one knew about, trusting that someday it would help his daughter when she needed it most. 3 months after the sale, Elena stood in the living room of her new house, watching Sophia play in the backyard through the window. The space was filled with light, warmth, and the sound of her daughter's laughter, while on the wall hung a single photograph, her father smiling, his arm around her mother, both of them young and hopeful. Elena thought about all the people who had told her to let go, to be practical, to sell the trunk and move on. She thought about their certainty that she was being foolish, their judgment of her choices, and she thought about how close she'd come to listening to them. Mrs. Chen had stopped by the week before, bringing flowers and tears of joy. "I should have known," she'd said. "Your father was a wise man. He knew exactly what he was doing." Marcus Webb, the antique dealer who had offered $250, had sent a letter. It was gracious, congratulating her on the discovery and apologizing for undervaluing the trunk. She appreciated the gesture, though she didn't respond. Some people deserved kindness in their embarrassment. Her landlord had called when word spread, suddenly friendly, asking if she needed anything, if there were repairs he could make to her old apartment. She'd declined politely and hung up. His concern came too late and for the wrong reasons. But the person Elena thought about most was her father. She wished he were here to see what his gift had become, to know that his daughter was safe, that his granddaughter would grow up without the fear of poverty that had shadowed Elena's entire adult life. She thought about the moment she'd discovered the false floor, the weight of those first gold bars in her hands, the terror and hope that had surged through her. And she understood now that her father's greatest gift hadn't been the gold itself, but the trust embedded in it. He'd trusted her to find it. He'd trusted her to hold on to it when everyone told her to let go. He'd trusted her to recognize its value when others saw only junk. That trust, more than the money, was what she would carry forward. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Sophia's teacher, a cheerful message about a field trip next month. Elena replied immediately, confirming Sophia's participation and offering to chaperone. Simple things, ordinary things, the kind of things other parents did without thinking. But for Elena, every yes was a small miracle, evidence of a life transformed. She made herself a cup of tea and sat on her new couch, comfortable and sturdy. Nothing extravagant, but worlds apart from the second-hand furniture she'd lived with for years. Through the window, she could see Sophia building something elaborate with sticks and leaves, her face scrunched in concentration. This was what security looked like. Not mansions or sports cars or designer clothes. Just peace. Just breathing room. Just the ability to say yes instead of always having to say no. The doorbell rang. Elena opened it to find a delivery person holding a large package. She signed for it and carried the box inside. It was from Patricia Grant, Harold's widow, the woman whose documents had helped unlock the mystery. Inside was a framed photograph, the one from 1987 showing Elena's father with the shipyard crew. Patricia had found the original, cleaned it, and had it professionally restored. Along with it was a note. "Your father was a good man. Harold spoke of him often in those last years before the program ended. He said Thomas was the most trustworthy person in the group, the one who would do right by whatever he'd been given. I'm glad Harold was right. I'm glad your father's trust was well placed. This photo belongs with you. May it bring you peace." Elena hung the photograph next to her parents' picture, creating a small gallery of her father's life. In the restored image, his face was clearer, younger, full of the quiet dignity she remembered. She stared at it for a long time, memorizing every detail, and whispered a thank you to the man who had given her everything by holding on to a secret for 35 years. That evening, as she tucked Sophia into bed in their new house, her daughter asked the question Elena had been waiting for. "Mommy, why did we move? Why is everything different?" Elena sat on the edge of the bed, palm brushing Sophia's hair back from her forehead. "Remember Grandpa's old trunk? The one that was in our apartment? The big brown one." "Yes. It turns out Grandpa left something special inside it. Something very valuable that he wanted us to have when we needed it most. And now we're safe because of it. We'll always be safe. Did Grandpa know we'd need it?" Elena thought about that. About her father working his modest job while sitting on a fortune, never spending it, never revealing it, just waiting. "I think he hoped we'd never need it. But he made sure it was there just in case. That's what parents do. We protect our children however we can." Sophia smiled sleepily. "Grandpa was smart. Yes, baby. He was very smart." After Sophia fell asleep, Elena returned to the living room and stood before her father's photographs. The weight of gratitude was overwhelming. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, desperate and exhausted, hours away from homelessness. She thought about how close she'd come to selling the trunk, to giving away the future for $250. But she hadn't. She'd held on. She'd trusted her instincts even when everyone around her said she was being foolish. And that trust, that stubborn refusal to let go of something that mattered, had changed everything. Elena understood now that her father's final gift had taught her something more valuable than financial security. It had taught her that some things are worth keeping, even when others can't see their value. That love and trust don't always make logical sense. That the world is full of hidden treasures, waiting for someone patient enough and brave enough to look beneath the surface. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts, stopping at Carmen's name. Her sister had called every day since learning the truth, sometimes apologetic, sometimes excited, always supportive. Their relationship had shifted, the old dynamics dissolving under the weight of this new reality. Elena typed a message. "Thank you for caring enough to push me, even when you were wrong. Dad would want us both to be happy. Let's have dinner this weekend, all of us together." The response came quickly. "I'd love that. And Elena, I'm proud of you. You trusted yourself when no one else did. That takes courage I didn't give you credit for." Elena set the phone down and walked to the window overlooking the backyard. The grass needed mowing, the garden needed planting, the fence needed painting. 1,000 small tasks that came with owning a real home. Tasks she'd dreamed about for years, while trapped in an apartment that was falling apart around her. Now those dreams were real, tangible, hers. She thought about the people still struggling the way she had been, still facing eviction notices and impossible choices, still working 2 jobs and barely surviving. Her foundation would help some of them. It wouldn't solve every problem, but it would provide the breathing room that made survival possible. The same breathing room her father's gift had given her. That was the real inheritance. Not the money itself, but the understanding that sometimes survival is about holding on to what matters until the moment when holding on makes all the difference. Elena turned off the lights and headed to bed. Tomorrow she had appointments with financial advisors, meetings about the foundation, calls to return. Her life was busy now in new ways, filled with responsibilities she'd never imagined having. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of her safe, warm house, with her daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall, Elena allowed herself to simply feel grateful. Grateful for a father who had trusted her with a secret that could change her life. Grateful for the stubbornness that had kept her from selling something everyone said was worthless. Grateful for the moment of discovery that had transformed desperation into hope. And grateful for the future that now stretched ahead of her, unlimited and bright, built on the foundation of gold bars and trust and a father's love that had reached across death to save his daughter when she needed it most. The trunk was gone now, secured in a vault somewhere, documented and photographed and sold. But what it had represented, the bond between father and daughter, the faith that had sustained them both, remained. Elena closed her eyes and imagined her father's smile, the way he used to look at her when she was young, with pride and hope, and absolute certainty that she would be okay. He'd been right, not because he'd left her gold, but because he'd taught her to recognize value when everyone else saw worthlessness. That lesson, more than any amount of money, was the treasure worth keeping. And as Elena drifted toward sleep, she whispered one final thank you to the quiet man who had worked 2 jobs and carried a secret and trusted his daughter to understand. When the time came that the most worthless-looking things can hold the greatest treasures. In the morning, when Sophia woke and asked what they should do with their day, Elena smiled and said, "Anything we want." And for the first time in her adult life, that answer was completely true. The news broke 3 weeks after the sale finalized. Elena had tried to keep it quiet, but money of that magnitude creates ripples impossible to contain. A local business reporter caught wind of the story through court filings related to the estate settlement, and once the first article appeared online, the floodgates opened. Local single mother discovers $258 million in gold hidden in father's trunk, read the headline. Within hours, it had been picked up by national outlets. By evening, news vans were parked outside Elena's new house, reporters knocking on her door, cameras pointed at her windows. Elena kept the curtains closed and didn't answer the door. Rebecca Torres had prepared her for this possibility, coaching her on media management, helping her draft a brief statement that acknowledged the discovery without providing details that might compromise her privacy or security. But even with professional guidance, nothing prepared Elena for the intensity of sudden fame. Her phone rang constantly. Requests for interviews from morning shows, documentary producers, podcasters, journalists from 3 continents, messages from people claiming to be long-lost relatives, childhood friends she'd never heard of, and investment advisors promising to help her manage her wealth properly. The most disturbing messages came from strangers who felt entitled to her money simply because they'd heard about it. "You don't need all that wealth," one email read. "Think about people who are really suffering. You should give most of it away." Another demanded she fund someone's failing business. A third accused her of greed for keeping money that belonged to the American people. Elena deleted them all, her hands shaking with anger and violation. She'd spent her entire adult life struggling, working herself to exhaustion, and now strangers felt comfortable judging how she chose to handle a windfall she'd inherited legally and honestly. The attention affected Sophia too. At school, other children began treating her differently, and some were suddenly eager to be her friend. Others whispered behind her back. One afternoon, Sophia came home in tears because a classmate had said her family stole money from the government. Elena held her daughter close, fury burning in her chest. "We didn't steal anything, baby. Grandpa was trusted with something important, and he kept it safe. Now it's ours, and we get to decide how to use it. Don't let anyone make you feel bad about that." But explaining complex historical programs to a 7-year-old, while reassuring her that she'd done nothing wrong, was harder than Elena had anticipated. She scheduled a meeting with Sophia's teacher and the school principal, explaining the situation and requesting they address any bullying immediately. The principal was sympathetic, but also clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Martinez, I understand this is difficult, but you have to understand. This kind of news creates complicated feelings. Some of our families are struggling significantly. When they hear about someone receiving such an enormous sum, even legitimately, it can breed resentment. So my daughter should suffer because other people are jealous? No, of course not. I'm just saying, perhaps some understanding on both sides would help. Maybe if Sophia kept a lower profile for a while." Elena stood abruptly. "My daughter has done nothing wrong. She's 7 years old. If other children are being cruel to her, that's a discipline issue, not a publicity issue. I expect the school to protect her the way you would protect any student being bullied." She left before the principal could respond, her hands clenched into fists. This was what wealth brought. She was learning, not just opportunity but complications, not just freedom but scrutiny, not just security but isolation. That evening, she sat down with Sophia and had a conversation she'd been dreading. "Baby, I think we need to talk about what's been happening at school." Sophia nodded, her small face serious. "Kids are saying mean things. I know, and I'm sorry about that. But I want you to understand something important. The money Grandpa left us, it's going to change our lives in good ways. But it's also going to make some things harder. Some people won't understand. Some people will be jealous. And some people will treat us differently because they think we're different now. But we're not different. We're still us." "Exactly. We're still us. And that's what I need you to remember. This money doesn't change who we are. It doesn't make us better than anyone else. It just means we don't have to worry about certain things anymore. But we still have to be kind. We still have to work hard. We still have to treat people with respect." Sophia considered this, then asked, "Can I still be friends with Emma? She's not rich." Elena's heart broke a little. "Of course you can. Being rich or not rich doesn't matter when it comes to friendship. What matters is how people treat you and how you treat them." "Okay." Sophia paused. "Mommy, are we going to be okay?" "Yes, baby. We're going to be just fine." But privately, Elena wasn't sure. The attention was overwhelming, and it showed no signs of diminishing. Every day brought new complications, new requests, new intrusions into her privacy. The worst moment came when her old landlord gave an interview to a tabloid website. He painted himself as a patient, understanding property owner who had worked with Elena during her financial struggles, conveniently omitting his threats and dismissive treatment. The article quoted him saying, "I always knew she was a good person. I'm happy things worked out for her." Elena read the interview with disgust. This was the same man who had spoken to her like she was an inconvenience, who had filed eviction proceedings without hesitation, who had made her feel worthless. Now he was trying to associate himself with her success. to claim some reflected glory from her story. She drafted a response, detailing his actual behavior, his lack of compassion, the fear he'd caused her and Sophia. But Rebecca Torres advised against publishing it. "I understand your anger," Torres said, "but engaging with people like him only feeds the story. Let him have his 15 minutes. People who actually know you will know the truth. Everyone else doesn't matter." It was good advice, but hard to follow. Elena wanted to defend herself, to correct the record, to make sure everyone knew exactly how she'd been treated when she had nothing. Instead, she focused on the foundation. Working with advisors and nonprofit specialists, she established the Thomas Martinez Foundation for Family Security, dedicated to providing emergency financial assistance to single parents facing eviction or homelessness. The foundation's endowment was $20 million, ensuring it could operate in perpetuity. The first grants went out 3 months after the foundation launched. 50 families received immediate assistance, enough to cover rent arrears, and security deposits for new apartments or temporary housing costs. Each grant also included access to financial counseling and employment services, addressing not just immediate crisis, but long-term stability. Elena personally reviewed every application, reading the stories of people trapped in the same impossible situations she'd faced. Single mothers working multiple jobs, fathers laid off from manufacturing plants, elderly people on fixed incomes watching rent increase beyond their reach. Each story felt familiar, painful, real. She wanted to help them all, but even $20 million had limits. She and her advisory board had to make difficult choices, prioritizing cases where intervention could make the most significant difference. One application came from a woman named Rachel, a grocery store clerk with 2 children, on facing eviction after her ex-husband stopped paying child support. Elena read the application 3 times, seeing herself in every line. The same desperation, the same exhaustion, the same fear of failing her children. She approved the grant immediately and added a personal note. "You're stronger than you know. This money isn't charity. It's a bridge. You'll get across. I believe in you." 2 weeks later, Rachel sent a thank you card. The handwriting was shaky, emotional. "You saved our lives," it read. "I was about to give up. Now I have hope again. Thank you doesn't feel like enough, but it's all I have." Elena kept the card on her desk, reading it whenever the complications of wealth felt overwhelming. This was why the money mattered, not for what it bought, but for what it enabled. Security, dignity, hope. For the media attention gradually decreased as newer stories captured public interest. Elena stopped making headlines, stopped receiving constant interview requests. Life began settling into a new normal, quieter than the chaos of the first months, but still fundamentally different from anything she'd known before. She hired a small staff, a housekeeper who came twice a week, a financial manager who helped oversee investments and charitable giving, and a part-time assistant who handled correspondence and scheduling. The help felt strange at first, almost uncomfortable. Elena had spent so many years doing everything herself that delegating felt like weakness, but she learned to accept it. Having help didn't mean she was lazy or entitled. It meant she had resources to use wisely, and using them to free up time for what mattered, on being present for Sophia, managing the foundation, maintaining her own well-being, was actually the smartest choice. 6 months after the sale, Elena ran into Maria, her friend from the night shift cleaning crew. They met by accident at a coffee shop, and Maria's face lit up when she recognized Elena. "I've been following your story," Maria said, pulling Elena into a tight hug. "I can't believe it. All that time we were scrubbing floors together, and you were sitting on a fortune." "I didn't know," Elena said. "I had no idea what was in that trunk. It's amazing. Really amazing. You deserved some good luck." They sat together for an hour, talking like old times. Maria was still working the night shift, still struggling to make ends meet. Elena listened to her friend's stories about difficult supervisors and broken equipment and bills that never stopped coming, and felt a familiar ache. Before they parted, Elena asked, "Are you okay? Financially, I mean. Do you need anything?" Maria hesitated, pride and need warring in her expression. "I'm managing. Maria, please, let me help. I don't want charity." "It's not charity. It's one friend helping another. You helped me so many times, watching Sophia when I was desperate, lending me money you couldn't spare. Let me return the favor." After a long pause, Maria nodded. "The truth is, I'm behind on my car payment. If I lose the car, I lose the job. I need about $2,000. Elena wrote a check for $10,000, pressing it into Maria's hand. $2,000 for the car. The rest is for whatever you need. No strings, no expectations, just help from someone who remembers what it's like." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Elena, this is too much." "No, it's exactly enough. Take it. Use it. And if you need more, tell me. That's what the money is for. Helping people I care about." Word spread among her old circles. Other friends from the cleaning crew, co-workers from the grocery store, parents from Sophia's old school. Some reached out directly, asking for help. Others were more subtle, mentioning difficulties in conversation and waiting to see if Elena offered. She helped where she could, but carefully. Torres had warned her about the dangers of becoming known as an easy source of money. "People will take advantage," Torres said. "Even good people, people who genuinely need help, can become entitled if they see you as an unlimited resource." So Elena set boundaries. She established a personal assistance budget separate from the foundation, limiting how much she could give to individuals each year. She developed criteria for evaluating requests, focusing on one-time needs rather than ongoing support, problems that could be solved with money rather than those requiring deeper intervention. It was harder than she expected, saying no to people she cared about. But she learned that sustainable generosity required limits, that trying to solve everyone's problems would drain her resources and eventually help no one. One afternoon, Carmen stopped by with their mother's old recipe box, something she'd been storing for years. They sat in Elena's kitchen, going through the cards, or reading recipes in their mother's handwriting, remembering Sunday dinners and holiday meals. "I've been thinking a lot about Mom and Dad lately," Carmen said, "about how hard they worked for everything they had. And I keep wondering, did Mom know? About the gold?" Elena had wondered the same thing. "I don't think so. Dad was too careful. If Mom had known, she would have told us. Or used it when she got sick and the medical bills piled up. She wouldn't have let Dad carry that secret alone if she'd known. So he protected her too, kept the burden to himself. Yeah, that sounds like Dad." Carmen set down the recipe she'd been holding. "I owe you an apology. A real one. Not just the quick sorry I said when I first found out. I pushed you so hard to get rid of that trunk. I made you feel like you were being irrational for holding on to it. And I was wrong. Not just about the value, but about respecting your choices. You were trying to help. I was trying to control. There's a difference. I saw you struggling, and instead of asking what you needed, I told you what I thought you should do. That wasn't help. That was me imposing my solutions because I thought I knew better." Elena reached across the table, taking her sister's hand. "I forgive you. And honestly, if I'd listened to you, if I'd sold the trunk, that would have been my choice. You weren't forcing me. You were offering advice. I just happened to ignore it. Best decision you ever made. One of them, anyway. They spent the rest of the afternoon cooking together, making their mother's tamales from the recipe card, working side by side the way they had as children. The rhythm was familiar, comforting. The money had changed Elena's circumstances, but it hadn't erased the simple pleasures of family and tradition. As Carmen left that evening, she paused at the door. You're handling this really well, you know. The money, the attention, all of it. I'm not sure I would have managed it as gracefully. I'm not graceful. I'm just trying to stay balanced. That's what grace is. After Carmen left, Elena cleaned up the kitchen, putting away the leftover tamales, wiping down the counters. Through the window, she could see Sophia playing in the backyard, chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. The scene was ordinary, perfect in its simplicity. This was what the money had bought. Not luxury, though she could afford that now. Not status or power or influence, just peace, or just the ability to watch her daughter play without the constant weight of worry pressing down on her shoulders. Elena thought about the trunk, secured now in a vault somewhere, documented and cataloged and sold. She thought about her father's hands on those same brass fittings, his decision to hide the gold rather than use it, his trust that someday it would serve its purpose. He'd been right. The gold had served its purpose, not when he'd needed it, but when his daughter had. Across decades and beyond death, his planning had protected his family when protection mattered most. That night, after Sophia was asleep, Elena sat at her desk and wrote a letter she would never send, addressed to her father. Dear Dad, I found what you left for me. It took me a while to understand what I was looking at, but I figured it out eventually. Ma, you would have been proud of how stubborn I was about keeping the trunk. Everyone told me to sell it, to let it go, to be practical. But I held on because it was yours, because it mattered. And it turned out that was exactly what you needed me to do. I wish you were here to see Sophia growing up in a safe house with a yard. I wish you could see the foundation I started in your name, helping families the way you helped ours. I wish you could tell me the whole story, how you got the gold, why you never used it, what you were thinking all those years while it sat hidden in the trunk. But even without those answers, I understand what you were trying to do. You were protecting us the only way you knew how, keeping a secret that must have been impossibly heavy, so that someday, if we needed it, we'd have something to fall back on. Thank you doesn't feel adequate, but thank you for trusting me. Thank you for the gift. Thank you for being the kind of father who thought about the future, even when the present was demanding. I love you. I miss you. And I promise to use what you left wisely, the way you would have wanted. Your daughter, Elena. She folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer, next to the photograph from 1987 and the copy of her father's Operation Safeguard documentation. These were her treasures now, worth more than any amount of gold, because they connected her to the man who had shaped her life in ways she was still discovering. Elena turned off the desk lamp and walked through her quiet house, checking locks, turning off lights, performing the small rituals of security that had become routine. Outside her window, the neighborhood was peaceful, safe, exactly the kind of place she'd dreamed of raising her daughter. The trunk was gone, but what it had represented remained. Trust. Love. The understanding that sometimes the most valuable things come disguised as ordinary objects, waiting for someone patient enough and stubborn enough to recognize their worth. And as Elena climbed into bed, tired but content, she thought about all the people who had looked at that trunk and seen junk, the neighbors who had shaken their heads, the relatives who had pushed her to get rid of it, the dealer who had offered $250. They'd all been so certain they knew what it was worth. But only Elena, holding on to sentiment when logic said to let go, had been willing to look deeper. And that willingness, that stubborn refusal to value things solely by their appearance, had made all the difference, not just in discovering the gold, but in understanding that the real treasure wasn't the money itself. It was the trust between a father and daughter, reaching across death to deliver exactly what was needed at exactly the right moment. That trust, unshakable and true, was worth more than $258 million. It was worth everything. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.